let's venture back down TurboView's memory lane with a little R&R. Hey everyone, well, since TurboViews has completed its mission of reviewing every single officially released TurboGrafx 16 game, this is a perfect time to indulge in a new episode of Random Rerun. In this little series, we take a look back at a TurboGrafx game or two that we reviewed on this channel many years ago. Today, we're going to grab a very special title, Legendary Axe, which was TurboView's episode number 24, along with its sequel, Legendary Axe 2, which was review number 39. Makyo Densetsu was released in Japan on the PC Engine in 1988, and a year later it hit North American shores. Now, why did I call this one special? Well, first of all, it was a launch title with the TurboGrafx 16 console, and that's a special thing. But it was also a somewhat high-profile game at the time, receiving praise by various video game magazines before it was even released. In fact, I remember seeing the ad showcasing its distinction of being Video Games, a Computer Entertainment's Game of the Year. Now, I didn't even know what magazine that was, honestly. I never heard of it, but it sounded pretty impressive. I also remember seeing this bragged about in those Toys R Us kiosk loops we talked about in the previous Random Rerun episode. Man, I love those videos. I can't help it. For me personally, Legendary Axe is special because it was one of the first TurboGrafx games I ever rented. Yes, rented. I couldn't believe there was actually a place that rented TurboGrafx games. Most stores around me only dealt with the bigger consoles. Then again, this place called Movie Stop also rented Laserdiscs at the time. So see, they were known for having some obscure items that nobody else did. Thank goodness, because I really enjoyed Legendary Axe, and although it's not my favorite action game or personal game of the year, I did see the appeal. This somewhat linear action game had a really cool gimmick in the charging of the axe, which was your main weapon. You could power it up to different strengths depending on how large your charge meter was. The stages were varied with different lengths, the enemies were quirky and unique, and there were some hidden areas to find. Plus, I have to say, the look of the game is extremely elegant with a really nice appeal. To me, it's one of the strongest of the launch titles and would have made a fantastic pack-in game, showing off a number of the Turbo's capabilities. After I rented it, I kept the game in the back of my mind and ended up purchasing it later on at a ma-and-pa video game buy-sell trade store locally. And that's the end of that story. In 1990, Ankoku Densetsu was released in Japan. In America, it hit the TurboGrafx 16 the same year, titled simply Legendary Axe 2. Now, anyone who has played this installment can tell you that it almost feels nothing like the original. I remember renting it as well, and being somewhat confused because the axe was only a teeny tiny part of the game. The charge function was removed, and overall it just had a different look and feel. Now, a dozen years ago when I reviewed this game, while doing my research for the episode, I found that there was not a lot of hard information about it. In the review, I mentioned some rumors that were floating around at the time, which included the American side making a mistake in the title's translation, or the game company capitalizing on the success of Legendary Axe and simply calling it a sequel. Well, new information cropped up since then, and it was indeed marketed as a follow-up to Legendary Axe in Japan, so it being a sequel here is correct. I had this as an annotation on top of the video when I found out, but YouTube did away with those, so there's that. In this one, you play as a prince who battles through a somewhat similar to the original linear action game. However, here you can utilize different weapons starting with a sword. Now these weapons do include the axe, which we might as well mention since, it's in the title. It's a good-looking game, has great music, and overall is a pretty strong turbo chip. But at the end of the day, it felt more like Rastan, if you know what I mean. Ironically, I found this one used at the same video game store as I did the first one, so Legendary Axe 2 was also added to the old school gaming collection sometime in the mid-90s. Anyway, as for the Legendary Axe 2 review, really quick, sorry about these serious jokes. It's lame, but what can I say? It's me. There is a little of my personal and game history with the Legendary Axe series. 2 great action games on the system, both of which were rentals, a rare thing for the TurboGrafx 16. If you want to learn more, we're going to roll the original reviews back to back. Thanks for joining me for Random Rerun, everybody. There are more of these to come throughout 2021, so stick around. Take care, and I'll see you all next time. The best part about video games is that heroes can come in all different shapes, sizes, and, well, types of wardrobe. In the case of Gaugan, who was out to save his childhood friend Flare in the Legendary Axe, a little piece of animal skin is the only thing covering his sensitive areas. Luckily, he has the amazing ability to color coordinate, as this covering matches his hair and weapon handle. What a stud. This hip-to-the-latest fashion hero must rescue Flare from the clutches of the evil Jagu, a half-man, half-beast resident cult leader who is using her as today's sacrifice. Unfortunately, good looks alone won't get the girl, so the elders of the village loan Gaugan a special weapon called the Legendary Axe in order to help with his quest. Now, Gaugan must head to the evil place, a place that's evil, in the hopes to rescue the damsel in distress. Legendary Axe was a rather high-profile game for its time and one of the best early side-scrolling action games for the TurboGrafx. In fact, it was Video Game and Computer Entertainment's 1989 Game of the Year. While I don't feel it deserved that distinction, it is a great game, showing off the early capabilities of the Turbo. Now, what makes Gaugan's Legendary Axe so legendary is the ability for it to charge up. The longer you don't use the axe, the more charge it has when eventually released onto an enemy. The maximum charge can also be increased as you find this power-up amongst the handful of others located in idols or just left behind. Thank goodness, because your attack is extremely cheesy at the game's beginning. This charging adds a bit of strategy. In some cases, it might be best to just hack away at an enemy at high speed. In others, it's worth the few seconds of waiting and patience as one giant charged-up slash can slice an enemy apart in an instant. Now, the game does remove some of Gaugan's charge upon his death. I'm not a big fan of this aspect of the game, especially in later levels. Luckily, they do place an upgrade not too far from the continue point. Figuring out how to appropriately use the axe is essential as it is your only weapon. But it never seems to get tedious and actually is quite fun and satisfying, especially at full charge. There are a total of 5 zones, and similar to Bonk's Adventure, they are not all the same length. It is a bit surprising to find out how far the zones will stretch out. The final zone is comprised of a ton of stages, laid out in a puzzle landscape forcing some good old-fashioned memorization. There are also some hidden areas to find with fake floors or invisible walls. The enemies in Legendary Axe all have sort of a pattern and require a slight learning curve just as an end boss would. This is a very addictive part of the game as you have to find the best strategy for defeating them all. For example, Amoeba, fast, well-timed axe swipes. Rockman, multiple crouching attack. Creepy guys with giant creepy swords, 2 nicely timed full-charged swipes. Bingo. Speaking of enemies, Legendary Axe has the strangest combination I've ever seen. Tarantulas, bears, nomads, frogmen, stupid bats that knock you around over and over and over again. Oh, and the monkeys. Don't get me started on the monkeys. Ugh, get off of me. And let's not forget the scariest of them all, the giant boulder. Look at that. It's coming back. It knows your face. It's alive. Damn. The good news is when you defeat an enemy, they literally explode. All of them. Even the rocks. Heh. Now that is justice. Legendary Axe looks interesting from a color and animation aspect right away. Elegant might be a good word for it. It has no real dimension or anything, but some location effects look really nice. There is a lot of diversity, but by the 4th zone, you'll notice enemies and some graphics will begin to repeat themselves quite often. Sometimes they're just slightly recolored. The music is pretty good. It has that jungle feel. I always thought it sounded nice, but the sound effects are a slight step down. The control is extremely responsive and the game plays pretty well. Since it's a typical platformer, you'll have to time jumps perfectly, swing on vines with accuracy, and be able to dodge at a moment's notice. This is all possible and executed well. However, I did always feel Gogan moved a little too slow. Legendary Axe only gives you 3 extra continues to defeat the game. This adds a little bit of replay value as you will not defeat it in one pass. On your first play, you'll breeze through the first zone without a problem. But the difficulty and learning curve structure definitely ramps up, especially in the 3rd zone. You'll find those continues disappearing rather quickly. The game can get frustrating, and some of the zones aren't as well balanced as others, but it does have a certain charm, and that is what will keep you coming back, even though the boulders, the bats, and the sweet little tiny butterflies all want you dead. While it is not the most original game, as it stems from traditional action platform roots, Legendary Axe is definitely one of the great ones from the early years of the TurboGrafx. I truthfully feel it would have made a great pack-in game in the system's early launch. It just goes to show that being good-looking and fashionable doesn't mean a damn thing if you don't have an axe to accentuate the style. I give it 4 turbo chips out of 5 because, quite frankly, any game that has giant boulders on a killing spree must be fun to play. Legendary Axe 2, a title many of us in the US were a little confused by. You would assume it's a sequel to the excellent Legendary Axe from 1989. It does have 2 axes on the artwork, so yeah. But the axe is only a small part of the game, and this time things are gloomy and dark with a story and time period that have nothing to do with the original. What the what? Well, some sources report it was simply a mistake in the US translation of the Japanese title. Others say it was a way of capitalizing on the success of the original by using the exact same name. Look, whatever the case, I am just thankful it was released because it's a great side-scrolling action game. Both the king and queen suddenly pass away, leaving the throne of the ancient kingdom empty. In order to determine the next king, there is a contest between the royal princes Zack and Sirius. Desperate for victory, Prince Zack turns to the master of evil and darkness, King Drotum, for help in defeating his brother. Of course, evil starts getting out of hand, and now Prince Sirius must restore peace to the royal palace with the legendary axe, sword in hand. There are 7 stages in Legendary Axe 2, some of which are quite expansive.
The game begins side-scrolling left to right, but then our hero will be forced to climb and choose multiple paths. This adds some nice variety. For example, the 6th stage is literally a climb fest with obstacles and enemies on almost every platform. One wrong step and it's all the way back to the bottom. As mentioned, Sirius begins with the legendary Royal Sword. No, I'm not kidding. Sirius. You know, it might actually be pronounced Sirius or Sirius, but I like Sirius. Anyway, later he collects the sickle and chain, good for attacking enemies at a distance, and the axe. There's the axe, the most powerful but with short range. Each of the weapons can be increased in power, making some quite deadly. The one thing missing is weapon charging and the power-up gauge for the main attack, which played a huge role in the first game. Many people miss this feature, but they do toss in multiple weapons this time in order to try and fill the gap. Enemies also drop orbs with little symbols inside. These symbols award power-up items, such as the Roman numeral 1 that hands out an extra life, and half-moons, medallions, and stars, all of which increase Sirius's health in some way. Magic bombs can also be collected, which allows Sirius to destroy groups of enemies all at once. Seriously sweet. That is, until you meet the enemies who can also shoot out the same magic bombs, and well, that seriously sucks. Okay, I'll stop now. Speaking of enemies, they are known as Prince Zack's evil Horde, and are a strange lot to say the least. Meet Nomalax, Conk, Manny, and these blob things that capture your legs and force you to jump in order to break free, just to land right smack dab into another one. Ugh. Although overall a very dreary and drab looking game, Legendary Axe 2 has some pretty good graphics with some nice color shining through. Most of the design is well crafted with interesting backgrounds and strange enemies, especially when it hits you with some dimension in Stage 6. The bosses are quite large and are just plain cool. Sometimes the main character animation is weird, like he almost looks bored. Otherwise, it's all pretty good. The sound effects are also pretty cool. Lightning bolts, the clank clank sound of the robots, and bosses who explode with gusto. Ooh, ah. The music is also really good and creates a great ambiance in each stage. You know, sometimes the sound chip in the TurboGrafx can really surprise you, and Legendary Axe 2 utilizes it pretty well. In my opinion, Sirius controls a little better than Gaugan, the star of the original game. He still has some bizarre jumping, but it seems to control better in midair. Using weapons is super fast and easy, and overall the controls are pretty sharp. When Sirius dies, he begins at a particular checkpoint within a stage randomly chosen by the game. Sometimes this is a bit unsettling. I also detected a little slowdown when a lot of characters were on screen at once, slightly affecting my aim. But otherwise, Legendary Axe 2 is quite fun with some great little touches smashing through. Plus, every time Sirius defeats a boss, he does something different, often getting so excited he bounces off the screen. These little moments really add to the fun, and I recommend Legendary Axe 2 for any action platform fan. Oh, Gaugan and Sirius do share one particular trait. They both wear next to nothing. Most sequels are usually more of the same. Legendary Axe 2 is interesting because it holds very little from the original while creating a fun and challenging action adventure. I found it to be a tad easier than the first, but it tosses in so many goodies that it makes for a worthwhile afternoon. I like this game just as much as the original. In fact, it kind of reminds me a little of the arcade classic Rastan. And that, my friends, is seriously cool.